Today I'm going to tell you a story so quiet, so heavy with silence, it can break your heart without ever raising its voice. Out on the high red rims of Apache country, where the wind stops without warning, and the earth remembers every drop of blood it has ever tasted. It begins with a single white thread caught on sacred sage, and a warrior who had every reason to walk away, but chose not to. One small act of mercy in a land that forgives nothing. One choice that cost him everything he was born to be. Stay with me. This is the kind of story the mountains still whisper when no one else is listening. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The sun had barely cleared the red rock rim when Cochise felt the change. Not in the light, not in the air, deeper in the ground itself. He stood alone on the high ledge above the valley, buckskin shirt stiff with old sweat and pine smoke, the weight of his bow across his back familiar as breath. Below the band moved slow and deliberate wickiups, rising like bent shoulders against the dawn women tying yucca fibers, children silent for once. No one looked up. No one needed to. Then the wind quit, not gradually. It simply stopped. The pines held their needles still. No bird called. Cochise's left arm, the one scarred from a grisly years back, began to ache in the old place. He glanced down. A thin line of blood welled along the faded cut, bright against the dark skin, dripping once, twice onto the cracked stone at his feet. The drops hit earth that should have drunk them without mark. Instead, they sat there a moment, separate before sinking slow, as though the ground were reluctant. He did not move. Farther along the ledge, faint claw marks scored the rock, not fresh, but not old either. Too deliberate. A bear had passed here, not hunting, just watching. Nearby, snagged on a low sage bush, a single white thread, fluttered cotton fine, the kind that came from white women's dresses. It should not have been here. Nothing white should have been here. Cochise's jaw tightened, the only sign. He had carried her Sarah Jane through the past 2 nights ago because she would have died otherwise. He had not asked her name until the fire was low and she could speak without shaking. He had not wanted to know. Knowing made it harder to pretend the land would forget. The silence stretched heavy as wet hide. He could walk away now. Wipe the blood with dust, snap the thread, let the wind take both. The band would never see. The ground might still forgive a small trespass if no one spoke of it. Or he could kneel. He knelt, fingers rough from years of bowstring and knife touched the dark stain. He pressed once hard, then lifted his hand. The blood had already vanished into the stone, but the earth remembered he felt it in the faint tremor under his palm, the way the rock seemed to breathe back at him. He whispered the name of his grandfather's father, low once only. Not a plea, a reminder. The wind answered. It came sudden and cold from the north, carrying the low, wet huff of something massive, moving through timber below the rim. Not close yet. Close enough. Cochise rose. He did not look toward the camp. He did not look at the white thread still trembling on the sage. He only stood there listening to the sound grow fainter, then gone, leaving behind the same dead quiet. The land had noticed, and it would not forget. The wickiup smelled of old smoke and cured hides, the kind of scent that settled deep in the lungs and never quite left. Cochise knelt beside the low fire pit, the small blaze barely more than embers, now casting faint orange along the curved willow poles. His hands moved steady, unwrapping the strip of buckskin from his forearm. The cut had opened again in the night, thin, deliberate, like the earth reminding him of what he carried. Blood had dried in a dark line across the scar tissue. He pressed a fresh wad of yarrow against it, the sharp green smell cutting through the heavier odors of pine resin and sweat-soaked wool. Sarah Jane lay on the far side of the fire, wrapped in the heavy buffalo robe he had given her 2 nights back. Her breathing had steadied since the fever broke at dawn, but her face still held the pale sheen of someone who had walked too close to the edge. She opened her eyes, slowly found him in the dimness, and held the look. No words, just the quiet weight of being seen. Cochise did not meet her gaze. He kept his eyes on the wound, tying the bandage with short practiced pulls. The knot tightened against skin already raw. He felt the pull in his chest, not pain exactly, but the slow grind of something he had tried to bury. Dawn's robe still hung on the far pole untouched since the day she stopped breathing. The band had left this wiki up alone after that. No one came near it. Until now. A faint scrape sounded outside soft moccasin on dry earth. Cochise's shoulders stiffened, but he did not turn. Through the narrow gap where the entrance flap met the frame, a shadow passed. Willow. She stood just beyond the reach of firelight, close enough that he could smell the sage she crushed into her hair that morning. Her hand rested on the hilt of the small knife at her belt, fingers curled but not drawing. She did not speak. She did not need to. The silence stretched until it felt like another skin. Cochise finished the knot, pressed his palm once against the bandage, as if testing its hold. Then he rose slow, the way a man moves, when he knows every motion is watched. He filled a shallow gourd from the water skin, carried it to Sarah Jane. She took it with both hands. Her fingers trembled once, then steadied. "I'll go when the sky lightens," she said, voice low, cracked from disuse. Not a promise. Just the truth she could offer. He gave no answer, only set the gourd down beside her and stepped back. The fire popped once, sending a spark up the smoke hole. Outside, Willow's shadow shifted. She turned without sound and walked away, footsteps fading into the night. But before she went, she bent and placed something at the threshold, a small, smooth river stone, black as obsidian etched with a single line of white clay. The mark of warning. The earth does not forgive twice. Cochise stood motionless, staring at the stone. The cut on his arm throbbed in time with his pulse. He could cross the threshold, now kick the stone into the dark, pretend it had never been placed. The band might never know. Or he could leave it there until morning, let the mark speak for itself. Let the law take its course one more night. He did neither. He simply stood, breathing slow, the smell of yarrow and smoke thick in his throat, listening to the night settle heavier around the wickiup. Somewhere far off, a single coyote yipped once sharp and lonely. Then nothing. The stone waited at the door, like a closed fist. The river ran thin and cold between banks of cracked mud, the water barely deep enough to cover a man's boot. Late afternoon light slanted low across the valley, turning the surface to hammered copper. Cochise walked ahead, rifle loose across his back, the soles of his moccasins silent on the dry grass. Sarah Jane followed a step behind, carrying the empty gourd, her borrowed deerskin leggings, too long, dragging faint lines in the dust. She moved careful, still weak in the legs, but the fever had left her eyes clear. She kept her gaze down, not daring to look too long at anything. 50 paces upstream, Willow knelt at the water's edge, wringing a fresh tanned hide between strong hands. The scrape of wet skin against skin carried sharp over the murmur of the current. Sage worked beside her, pounding another hide against a flat stone, the rhythmic thump steady as a heartbeat. Sparrow played nearby, chasing a grasshopper with a stick, bare feet kicking up small puffs of earth. The child saw them first. She stopped head cocked, then broke into a run straight towards Sarah Jane, laughing arms out like she meant to hug a sister. The sound cut the air, bright, careless. Cochise felt it in his spine before he saw it, the sudden tightening, of every muscle in the scene. Willow's hands froze mid-twist. Sage's stone paused halfway down. Sarah Jane halted breath, catching eyes wide with the knowledge that she carried poison no child should touch. Willow moved fast. One hand shot out, caught Sparrow by the wrist, yanked her back hard enough that the girl's feet left the ground for a heartbeat. "Don't touch," Willow said, voice low, flat final. Not anger, just law spoken aloud. Sparrow blinked up at her grandmother, confused lower lip trembling. Willow did not soften. She turned the child away, pressing her against her skirt, shielding her from sight. Sage straightened slowly, wiping wet hands on her thighs. Her eyes met Cochise's across the water, long searching, no warmth left in them. The question hung unspoken. How far will you carry this? A black crow dropped from the sky, silent wings folding as it settled on the flat, sacred stone 20 paces off. It cocked its head beak open, watching. No call, just the stare. Cochise's throat worked once. He could send Sarah Jane ahead alone, let her fill the gourd at the shallows, while he stayed back, kept distance, kept the band from seeing him walk beside her. She might stumble, might fall, might draw the bear that had shadowed them for days. He would have saved her life twice already. One more risk was not his burden. Or he could step forward now in full sight of Willow and Sage and walk with her to the water. Let them see the choice made plain. Let the stain spread. He stepped forward. The grass whispered under his feet. Sarah Jane glanced at him once, quick, grateful, terrified, then kept her eyes on the river. Cochise matched her pace close enough to catch her if she faltered, far enough that no one could mistake the space between them for comfort. Behind them, Willow rose. She set Sparrow behind her, one hand firm on the girl's shoulder. No shout, no curse, only the slow turn of her head tracking them. Her eyes followed every step Cochise took beside the white woman. The look said what words never would. If the law demands blood to balance this, it will not be Sparrow's. The crow lifted suddenly, wings beating heavy against the still air. It uttered one long, scraping cry, drawn out, mournful, then wheeled away toward the high rim, black against the dying light. The river kept running indifferent, but the silence that followed was heavier than before, and it carried the promise of something that could not be unsaid. The sun hung low and swollen over the river, bleeding red across the slow current like a wound that would not close. Shadows stretched long from the cottonwoods, turning the water black where it pooled. Cochise crouched at the bank, filling the gourd with deliberate scoops, the cold bite of the stream numbing his fingers. Sarah Jane stood a pace behind, clutching the second vessel to her chest, her borrowed moccasins sinking slightly into the soft mud. She had not spoken since they left the wickiup. Neither had he. Willow worked 50 yards downstream, kneeling in the shallows, guiding Sparrow's small hands along the wet hide stretched over a flat rock. She showed the child how to read the faint scrape of claw on bark, how to know whether the mark belonged to bear or cougar. Sparrow listened hard, nodding, her dark braids swinging. Then the girl looked up, saw the strangers, and broke free. She ran light-footed across the gravel bar, straight toward Sarah Jane, hand outstretched, palm open, as if to offer the pebble she had found. The pebble dropped forgotten as she reached. Her fingers brushed the frayed edge of Sarah Jane's torn sleeve, barely a touch light as wind through grass. Cochise froze. The gourd slipped an inch in his grip, water sloshing over the rim onto his wrist. He felt the moment stretch thin, brittle. The law was clear. No child of the people could touch what the land had not yet cleansed. Sparrow carried the mark, now small, invisible to the eye, but the spirits would see, and they would remember. Willow moved like a hawk dropping. She crossed the distance in 3 strides, seized Sparrow by the shoulders, pulled her back against her body. The child gasped, startled. Willow did not raise her voice. She only leaned close to the girl's ear and whispered the name of her great-grandfather 3 times, slow. Measured the syllables falling like stones into still water. A soft curse, not spoken in anger, but in necessity. Protection. Sarah Jane bowed her head arms, tightening around the gourd, until her knuckles whitened. She understood enough. She had become the thing that tainted. The crow came then. It settled on a low branch overhanging the sacred stone at the water's edge, black feathers catching the last red light. It cocked its head, opened its beak, and let out one dry, scraping note, short, final. Willow straightened. She turned Sparrow away, shielding her with a curve of her body. Then she looked at Cochise, not with hatred, with the quiet certainty of a woman who has already decided what must be done if the balance tips further. She did not speak. She simply placed one hand on the child's head, the other on the knife at her belt, and waited. Cochise felt the weight settle deeper in his chest. He could cross the few steps now, kneel before Willow, admit the trespass aloud, and lead Sparrow to the cleansing pool upstream, wash the mark away, with the proper words and herbs. But the act would be seen by Sage, by the others gathering hides farther down. It would be spoken of. The band would know he had kept the white woman past the 3 sons the law allowed. The stain would spread, or he could stay silent. Let Willow handle the child alone. Let Sparrow carry the fear of what she had touched. Let the girl learn early that some things must not be approached. He would keep his place for now. But the child's trust in him would break, and with it, his right to stand as guardian of Dawn's line. He took 1 step toward them, then another. Willow did not move. Cochise reached the place where they stood. He lowered himself slowly to 1 knee before her palm flat against the earth, still warm from the day. No words, only the gesture. The ground pressed back hard and unyielding. Willow held his gaze a long moment. Then she turned, guiding Sparrow away toward the deeper shallows. The girl twisted once in her grandmother's grip, looked back over her shoulder. Her eyes, wide dark, full of sudden fear, met Cochise's. She did not cry. She only stared until Willow drew her out of sight around the bend. Cochise rose. He looked at Sarah Jane. Her face was pale, lips pressed thin. He spoke once low, the words rough from disuse. "Tomorrow, you go." She nodded once small. The wind came up then, carrying the low, wet huff of the bear from somewhere in the timber above the rim, closer now, deliberate. The sound rolled down the valley and settled over them like smoke that would not lift. The night had come down hard, thick with the smell of pinon smoke and cooling earth. Small fires dotted the camp like scattered embers, each one ringed by low voices and the soft scrape of moccasins on dry ground. Cochise stood at the edge of the circle around Chief Blackhawk's fire, half in shadow, arms folded across his chest. The flames threw light on the faces of the people seated there, Sage, 2 older hunters, a handful of women. But no one looked his way. No one had since sundown. Inside the wickie up behind him, Sarah Jane sat cross-legged on the hides, folding the few things she owned into a small bundle. The torn dress she had come in the gourd, the buffalo robe he had given her. She moved slow, careful not to make noise. Through the thin willow walls, she could hear the low murmur of the council, the words rising and falling like wind through dry grass. Chief Blackhawk sat with his back to the tallest pole gourd pipe in hand, smoke curling from the bowl. His voice carried without effort. The bear sign grows thicker south of the bend. Tracks wider than a man's shoulders. Water in the lower pools stands lower than it should this moon. The land is angry. He paused, tapped the pipe against his palm. Ash fell gray and silent. It remembers what walks among us that does not belong. Sage shifted where she sat. Her eyes flicked once toward the dark shape of Cochise, at the rim of light, then away. Regret moved across her face, brief as a cloud shadow, but she said nothing. The others kept their gaze on the fire. Black Hawk lifted his hand, pointed the stem of the pipe toward the wickiup. Not at Cochise, at the place where he stood. The balance is broken. The stranger must leave before first light. If she stays, the hunting ground south will close. The water will sour. We lose the land forever. No one spoke after that. The fire snapped once, sending a spark up into the dark. Cochise felt the words settle on his shoulders like wet, hide-heavy cold final. He had known this was coming. Still hearing it spoken made the air thinner. He stepped back from the circle's slow boots, silent on the packed earth. No one turned to watch him go. As he passed between two fires, a young hunter rose to add wood, then sat again without greeting. The small slight landed like a stone in still water ripples, no splash. Cochise kept walking. Inside the wickiup, Sarah Jane had finished tying the bundle. She looked up when he entered the firelight, catching the pale line of her cheek. She stood. "I'll go alone," she said quietly. "You've done enough." Cochise did not answer at once. He crossed to the corner where his gear lay, lifted the heavy deerskin coat he used for winter hunts, thick oiled against wind, and held it out to her. She hesitated, then took it. The weight pulled her shoulders down a fraction. He turned away, knelt by his own pack. His fingers moved over the bowstring, testing the tension, then along the haft of the knife at his belt. Small motions hidden from the doorway. Checking, preparing. Not for a war. For what might come after. Outside, the council fire had burned lower. Chief Black Hawk rose joints stiff and stood looking toward the wickiup. The others followed his gaze. No one moved closer. The space around the shelter had widened, as though the ground itself pushed them back to keep the water clean. A low sound rolled down from the timber above camp, not wind, not coyote. The bear's huff deeper now, closer than the night before. It carried on the cold air, lingered, then faded. But the echo stayed. Cochise straightened. He looked at Sarah Jane once more. She met his eyes, the coat draped over her arm like armor she did not want. The night pressed in heavier, the fires smaller, the silence between them thick with what neither would say. And somewhere in the dark timber, the bear waited patient, hungry, no longer far away. The darkness before dawn was absolute thick as tar, broken only by the faint gray smear of snow beginning to fall. Cochise moved ahead through the timber rifle, slung low moccasins cutting silent paths in the fresh powder. Sarah Jane followed close, the heavy deerskin coat dragging at her shoulders, breath fogging white in the cold. They had left the camp without firelight or farewell, slipping south toward the old trail that led eventually to Broken Creek. No words passed between them. The decision had been made in the wickiup with a single look. Snow thickened fast. Flakes clung to branches, muffled every sound, until the world shrank to the crunch of their steps and the rasp of their breathing. They had covered perhaps half the distance down the ridge when the cry came thin high, almost lost in the wind. A child's voice. Not far. Cochise stopped. The sound cut through him like a knife edge. Sparrow. He knew it in his bones before reason caught up. The girl must have slipped from her grandmother's lodge in the night, drawn by some child's impulse, and the storm had swallowed her. Sarah Jane heard it too. She turned eyes wide in the dimness, fear plain but steady. She said nothing. She only waited. The cry came again, fainter, weaker, edged with panic. closer to the black mouth of a cave in the rock face ahead. Cochise knew the place. Bear sign had been thick there for weeks. The huff rolled out now low and wet, unmistakable. The beast was inside, roused angry at the intrusion. Cochise's hand tightened on the rifle stock until the wood creaked. Chief Blackhawk's words echoed in his skull. The stranger must leave before first light. To turn back now to bring her with him toward the camp was to break the order openly. The band would see. They would know. Forgiveness would not follow. To keep going south, to leave Sparrow to the cold, and the bear was to let Dawn's bloodline end in a snowdrift. To let the girl's small heart stop because he had chosen the law over the child. The spirits would remember that too. He would no longer be Apache in any way that mattered. Sarah Jane's breath came quicker beside him. She looked at the dark cave mouth, then at him. Her eyes held fear deep raw, but something harder beneath it. She did not beg. She did not speak at all. She only stood there waiting for what he would do. The snow fell thicker, erasing their tracks behind them already. The child's cry faltered, then rose again, feeble fading. A small dark spot appeared on the white ground near the cave entrance, blood fresh seeping from a cut or scrape. The law was clear. Blood demanded blood if the balance was not restored in time. Cochise drew a slow breath of the cold burning his lungs. He looked at Sarah Jane one last time, long enough to see the understanding in her face, the acceptance that whatever came next, she would not leave him to face it alone. He turned. He broke into a run toward the cave boots, kicking up snow rifle coming up to his shoulder. Sarah Jane followed without hesitation, coat flapping, breath ragged but steady. Behind them, through the thickening white, a figure appeared on the ridge. Willow searching her shawl dark against the gray. She stopped when she saw them veer toward the bear's den. She stood motionless, hands at her sides, watching the two shapes disappear into the storm. The wind howled once, swallowing their trail. The snow closed over everything Track's blood choice. There was no going back now. The law had been broken in full sight of the spirits, and the land would not forget. The storm had swallowed the world. Snow drove sideways in blinding sheets, the wind a low, constant howl that tore at exposed skin and filled the mouth with ice. Inside the cave mouth, the air turned thick and rank bare musk, old blood, wet fur. Cochise crouched low at the entrance knife, drawn in his right hand, the blade catching the faint gray light that leaked through the blizzard. His left arm throbbed where the old scar had split again in the cold, but he ignored it. The pain was distant now, secondary. Sparrow lay curled against the rock wall, just inside small body, shivering violently, lips blue. A thin cut on her palm had bled onto the snow outside, bright drops already freezing into dark coins. Sarah Jane knelt beside her, coat open, wrapping the girl in its folds, pressing her own body heat against the child's back. She did not speak. She only held on. The bear stood deeper in the cave, massive silhouette blocking the narrow throat of stone. Its eyes reflected dull red, in the half-light breath steaming in heavy clouds. It had not charged yet. It simply watched, slow, deliberate, owning the space. The low rumble in its throat vibrated through the rock under Cochise's boots. He felt the moment settle on him like wet buckskin, cold, heavy, inescapable. There was no turning back. The chief's order had been clear: the stranger leaves before dawn. To come back now to bring her into this fight was to stand before the band as a man who had chosen blood over law. They would not forgive. The name of his grandfather's father would no longer belong to him in their mouths. But Sparrow's breathing had grown shallow, ragged. Dawn's line ended here if he walked away. The spirits would know. He would know. He whispered once, barely audible, the name of his great-grandfather. Not a prayer, a reminder. He was still Apache, even if the band never called him that again. The bear shifted its weight. One massive paw scraped stone. Hot breath rolled out, carrying the stench of carrion and winter hunger. Cochise rose slowly, knife-low body, squared between the animal and the two behind him. He did not shout. He did not posture. He simply stepped forward one measured pace, then another, closing the distance. The bear's head lowered, ears flattening. A warning growl built deep in its chest. Sarah Jane tightened her arms around Sparrow. She looked up at Cochise, eyes wide, steady, despite the fear. She understood what this choice cost him. She did not beg him to stop. She only held the child closer and waited. From the ridge behind them, a faint shape moved through the white willow, tracking the small trail of blood and footprints. She stopped at the edge of Sight Shoal, whipping in the wind, face half hidden. She saw Cochise advance. She saw Sarah Jane cradling Sparrow. She did not call out. She did not run forward. She only stood witness to the moment the law bent and broke. Her eyes would carry this back to the band. There would be no unseeing it. The bear lunged. Cochise met it, knife flashing, once in the dimness, blade sinking into thick shoulder muscle. The animal roared, rearing claws, raking air. Cochise twisted a side breath, exploding white blood, his or the bear's spattering dark across the snow at the cave mouth. Sarah Jane pulled Sparrow deeper into the coat, scrambling back toward the entrance, dragging the girl with her. The roar echoed once more, deep guttural, then cut short. A heavy thud shook the ground. Silence followed, sudden and complete, broken only by the wind and the soft patter of blood on snow. No one moved. Willow remained on the ridge, motionless, watching the dark mouth of the cave. The storm howled on, erasing the tracks, the blood, the choice. But the silence that settled was different now. Dangerous, unfinished, and the red stain on the white ground spread slowly, uncertain whose it was. The storm had broken at first light, leaving the valley hushed under a thin white shroud. Snow lay smooth and unbroken, except for the dark trail of footprints and blood leading back to camp. Cochise walked in front, Sparrow cradled against his chest in one arm, her small face pressed to his shoulder, breathing shallow but steady. His other arm hung limp and the deep gash across his shoulder blade, weeping fresh red down the torn buckskin. Each step pulled the wound wider, but he did not falter. Sarah Jane walked beside him, coat open, face-drained gray eyes fixed on the ground ahead. Her hands were still trembling from the cold and the night. The central fire still burned low in the heart of camp smoke, rising thin and straight in the windless dawn. The band stood in a loose half-circle around it, men, women, children, all silent. Chief Black Hawk waited at the center gourd staff, planted in the snow like a stake. His face was carved stone eyes, shadowed under the brim of his hat. No one moved to meet them. No one spoke. Cochise stopped 10 paces from the fire. He lowered Sparrow gently to the ground. The girl swayed, then steadied herself against his leg. He did not look down at her. He only straightened shoulders, square blood dripping dark spots into the white at his feet. The wound smelled of iron and wet hide, sharp final. Black Hawk stepped forward, a one measured pace. His eyes moved over Sparrow alive, breathing then over the blood on Cochise's shoulder, and then to Sarah Jane standing silent behind him. The chief lifted the staff, pointed the carved end at Cochise's chest. Not in threat, in judgment. "You saved the child," Black Hawk said, voice low, carrying without effort. "Blood for blood. The spirits see it." He paused, the staff steady. "But you brought the stranger back. You turned against the words spoken at this fire." The land does not forgive twice. No one stirred. Sage stood to the left, arms folded, eyes down. The young hunter who had once shared meat with Cochise looked away. Willow stepped from the circle, took Sparrow by the hand, drew her gently behind her. The girl glanced once at Cochise's wide eyes, no tears, then buried her face in her grandmother's skirt. Willow did not speak. She only watched Cochise with the same quiet certainty she had carried since the river. Witness to the fracture. She would carry it forward. Cochise met Blackhawk's gaze. He did not lower his head. He did not speak. The fire popped once, sending a spark curling upward. The silence stretched until it felt like another wound. Blackhawk lowered the staff. You choose now. Go and the band keeps the land. Stay, and we must cut the name from you. Your grandfather's father will no longer answer when you call. The words landed without echo. Cochise felt them settle in his chest like cold lead. He could walk away now, take Sarah Jane, vanish into the high country, let the band heal without him. The land would forgive them. Or he could remain, face the knife that would sever his line from the people, lose the right to speak the names of the dead without shame. Either way, the place he had held here was gone. He looked once at Sarah Jane. Her face was pale, lips pressed thin, but she did not turn away. He looked at Sparrow, small, safe breathing. Then he looked at Willow. She held his gaze unblinking. Cochise reached down, lifted Sparrow one last time, set her in front of Willow. The girl clung to her grandmother's leg. Willow took the child's hand, but her eyes stayed on Cochise. She did not nod. She did not speak. She only held the look. Cochise turned. He walked past the fire, past the silent circle toward the rising slope of the mountain. No one followed. No one called after him. The wind had died, but the cold cut deeper now, slicing through the torn buckskin, finding the open wound. Behind him, the fire burned on small, steady, indifferent. The snow began again, light flakes drifting down, covering the blood spots one by one. The high rim cut sharp against a sky gone pale, the kind of light that comes after a storm has spent itself and left only cold. Cochise stood at the edge, boots planted on cracked granite, the wind tugging at the torn edges of his shirt where blood had dried stiff and black. The wound on his shoulder had stopped bleeding, but the ache ran deep, bone deep, a constant reminder that some things did not heal clean. Sarah Jane stood beside him, the heavy coat still draped over her shoulders, hands clasped in front of her like she was holding something fragile that might break if she let go. Below them, the valley lay quiet. Smoke rose thin and steady from the central fire of the camp, small, persistent proof the band had survived the night. The wickiups huddled close together, people moving slow in the aftermath, tending fires, checking hides living on. But no path led back to them. No trail had been left open. Cochise reached into the pouch at his belt and drew out the small black stone he had taken from the cave floor. The one Sparrow's blood had touched the one the bear had stepped over before it fell. The stone was smooth, cool, etched with faint white lines that might have been clay or frost or something older. He held it out palm flat. Sarah Jane looked at it, then at him. She did not speak. She only opened her hand. He placed the stone in her palm. Her fingers closed around it slowly. The weight was small, but it settled like iron. Neither of them looked away from the valley. The silence between them was thick, not empty, full of everything that had been lost in the choosing. From a distant ledge across the draw, Willow stood alone. Her shawl had blown back from her shoulders, dark hair whipping in the wind, but she did not move to cover herself. She watched them, two figures small against the sky, the man who had once been brother to her sister's children, the woman who had carried the stranger's mark into their lives. She did not call out. She did not raise a hand. She only stood eyes fixed, carrying the sight of this moment like a stone in her own chest. The band would ask. She would tell what she had seen. The memory would not fade. Cochise felt the pull behind his ribs, not regret exactly, but the slow grind of knowing he could never again stand at that fire and speak the names of the dead without the words tasting false. If he returned now they would offer the knife one cut to sever the line, one right to erase his place. The spirits would hear it. Dawn's name would no longer answer when he spoke it in the dark. He could go back, kneel, ask for the ritual of cleansing, beg the band to choose mercy over law. But mercy would split them. Blood would answer blood, and the valley would pay. Or he could keep walking into the high country, into the unnamed places where no one would know his name or his shame. Keep the woman who had chosen to follow. Keep what remained of himself. He looked down at the stone in her hand. His fingers brushed hers once brief, deliberate, then closed over it with her. He lifted their joined hands, opened them, and let the stone fall. It dropped straight, turning once in the air, vanishing into the shadowed cleft below. No sound came back, no echo. Just the soft rush of wind filling the empty space where it had been. Cochise released her hand. He met her eyes long enough to see the understanding there, the quiet pain she carried for what she had cost him. "Go on," he said, voice rough from the cold and the night. They turned together. The Swung Mu rolled in from the peaks, thick and gray, swallowing the rim behind them. Below, the smoke from the camp rose straight, untouched by their leaving. Willow remained on her ledge, small and dark against the sky, watching until the mist closed over the two figures, and they were gone. The wind carried no sound after that, only the slow scrape of stone on stone somewhere far below, as if the valley itself were shifting, settling into a new shape that no one would ever quite recognize. The third dawn after the storm came thin and merciless light, bleeding pale across the highest rim where the rock dropped sheer into shadow. Cochise stood at the edge, boots planted on frost-rimed stone, the wind cutting through the torn buckskin at his shoulder, where the wound had crusted black. No bandage, now only the slow seep of old blood and the deeper ache that no herb would touch. Sarah Jane stood beside him, the heavy coat still wrapped around her hands, clasped tight around the small black stone he had plucked from the air before it fell into the cleft 2 days back. She held it as though it weighed more than rock should. Below, the valley lay quiet. Smoke rose from the central fire, thin, steady, the same thread of gray that had marked the camp since before the snow. The wiki-ups huddled close, people moving slow in the cold morning. A woman tending embers, a child carrying water, the band breathing on. They had survived. The water ran clear again. The land had balanced itself. But no smoke drifted toward the rim. No path opened upward. Cochise reached into the small leather pouch at his belt, the one he had carried since Dawn's fire went out. He drew out a pinch of gray ash, fine as dust, the last remnant of the blaze that had warmed her final night. He held it open in his palm, the wind tugging at the edges, but not yet taking it. This was the right: scatter the ash to the 4 directions. Speak the names, let the soul find the ancestors. Simple, necessary, final. He did not speak the names aloud. Not here. Not with the camp watching from below. He only lifted his hand, let the ash sift between his fingers into the updraft. It caught the light, once pale, fleeting, then drifted down toward the valley. The wind carried most of it away, scattering it thin across the high rocks. A few grains fell straight, vanishing into the shadowed cleft without sound. None reached the camp smoke. None touched the ground where the people still lived. Sarah Jane watched the ash fall. Her fingers tightened around the stone. No tears. No words. She understood what this small act cost, the last claim he could make on the dead without shame. The band would never hear those names from his mouth again. If he spoke them in the years to come, they would taste like dust. From a far ledge across the draw, Willow stood alone. Her shawl had blown back hair loose in the wind, dark against the pale sky. She did not move closer. She did not raise a hand in farewell or warning. She only watched, eyes fixed on the two figures at the rim, on the man who had once carried Dawn's child on his shoulders, on the woman who had followed him into exile. A black crow circled once overhead, silent wings cutting the air, then dropped to perch on the sacred stone near Willow. It cocked its head, beak open, let out one long scraping cry, sharp, final, then lifted again toward the high peaks where Cochise and Sarah Jane stood. Cochise felt the sound settle in his chest. He looked down at the stone in Sarah Jane's hand. His fingers brushed hers once, light, deliberate, then closed over it with her. He lifted their joined hands, opened them, and let the stone drop. It fell straight, turning once, in the thin light, vanishing into the shadowed cleft below. No echo returned. No sound at all. He released her hand. He met her eyes long enough to see the quiet understanding there. The knowledge that she carried the weight of his loss as surely as he carried hers. They turned together. The mist rolled in from the high peaks, thick and gray, swallowing the rim behind them. They walked into it, not toward the camp, not toward the old trail south, but into the unnamed country beyond the ridge. No path, no promise. Willow remained on her ledge, small and dark against the sky, watching until the mist closed over them, and they were gone. The crow uttered one last cry, drawn out, mournful, then fell silent. The wind kept blowing cold and steady, carrying nothing back to the valley below. Only the smoke rose on thin and straight indifferent. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours, thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.